back so soon. Look at that. Yes, you're just as excited as I am to read Jazz by Toni Morrison. That's right. We're back with part 3 of Jazz. We've read through the first 2 parts on previous videos on this channel. Go ahead and check those out if you haven't watched them already. And now we're back with part 3. I'm gonna read to you in a nice, soft-spoken voice, and you're gonna lay back and get your life. Alright? Deal? Perfect. Sit back, close your eyes, and let your mind drift off to the beautiful prose of Toni Morrison. Let's jump right in. Okay, let's jump right in with the last page of the last chapter, just to get us up to speed a little bit, okay? It doesn't last, of course. And 24 hours later, they're frightened again and restoring themselves with any helplessness within reach. So the weekends, destined to disappoint, are strident, sullen, sprinkled with bruises and dots of blood. The regrettable things, the coarse in our sour remarks, the words that become active boils in the heart, none of that takes place on Thursday. I suppose the man for whom it is named would hate it, but the fact is, his day is a day for love in the city and the company of satisfied men. They make the women smile. The tunes whistled through perfect teeth are remembered, picked up later, and repeated at the kitchen stove. In front of the mirror near the door, one of them will turn her head to the side and sway, enchanted with her waistline and the shape of her hips. Up there in that part of the city, which is the part they came for, the right tune whistled in a doorway or lifting up from the circles and grooves of a record can change the weather from freezing to hot to cool. Here we go. Now we're getting into part 3. Like that day in July, almost 9 years back, when the beautiful men were cold. In typical summer weather, sticky and bright, Alice Manfred stood for 3 hours on Fifth Avenue, marveling at the cold black faces and listening to drums saying what the graceful women and the marching men could not. What was possible to say was already in print on a banner that repeated a couple of promises from the Declaration of Independence and waved over the heads of its bearer. But what was meant came from the drums. It was July in 1917, and the beautiful faces were cold and quiet, moving slowly into the space the drums were building for them. During the march, it seemed to Alice as though the day passed, the night too, and still she stood there, the hand of the little girl in her own, staring into each cold face that passed. The drums and the freezing faces hurt her, but hurt was better than fear, and Alice had been frightened for a long time. First she was frightened of Illinois, then of Springfield, Massachusetts, then 11th Avenue, 3rd Avenue, Park Avenue. Recently, she had begun to feel safe nowhere south of 110th Street, and 5th Avenue was for her the most fearful of all. That was where white men leaned out of motor cars with folded dollar bills peeping from their palms. It was where salesmen touched her, and only her, as though she were part of the goods they had condescended to sell her. It was the tissue required if the management was generous enough to let you try on a blouse, but no hat, in a store. It was where she, a woman of 50 and independent means, had no surname. Where women who spoke English said, "Don't sit there, honey, you never know what they have." And women who knew no English at all and would never own a pair of silk stockings moved away from her if she sat next to them on the trolley. Now, down 5th Avenue from curb to curb, came a tide of cold black faces, speechless and unblinking because what they meant to say, but did not trust themselves to say, the drums said for them, and what they had seen with their own eyes, and through the eyes of others, the drums described to a T. The hurt hurt her, but the fear was gone at last. Fifth Avenue was put into focus now, and so was her protection of the newly orphaned girl in her charge. From then on, she hid the girl's hair in braids tucked under, lest white men see it raining round her shoulders and push dollar-wrapped fingers towards her. She instructed her about deafness and blindness, how valuable and necessary they were in the company of white women who spoke English and those who did not, as well as in the presence of their children. Taught her how to crawl along the walls of buildings, disappear into doorways, cut across corners in choke traffic, how to do anything, move anywhere to avoid a white boy over the age of 11. Much of this she could effect with her dress, but as the girl grew older, more elaborate specifications had to be put in place. High-heeled shoes with the graceful straps across the arch, the vampy hats closed on the head with saucy brims framing the face, makeup of any kind, all of that was outlawed in Alice Manfred's house, especially the coat slung low in the back and not buttoned, but clutched like a bathrobe or a towel around the body, forcing the women who wore them to look like they had just stepped out of the bathtub and were already ready for bed. Privately, Alice admired them, the coats and the women who wore them. She sewed linings into these coats when she felt like working, and she had to look twice over her shoulder when the gay northeasters and the city belles strolled down 7th Avenue. They were so handsome. But this envy-streaked pleasure Alice closeted, and never let the girls see how she admired those ready for bed in the street clothes. And she told the Miller sisters, who kept small children during the day for mothers who worked out of the house, what her feelings were. They did not need persuading, having been looking forward to the day of judgment for a dozen years, and expecting its sweet relief any minute now. They had lists of every restaurant, diner, and club that sold liquor, and were not above reporting owners and customers to the police until they discovered that such news in the racket squad was not only annoying, it was redundant. When Alice Manfred collected the little girl from the Miller sisters, on those evenings following the days her fine stitching was solicited, the three women sat down in the kitchen to hum and sigh over cups of postum at the signs of imminent demise, such as not just ankles, but knees in full view, lip rouge red as hellfire, burnt matchsticks rubbed on eyebrows, fingernails tipped with blood. You couldn't tell the streetwalkers from the mothers. And the men, you know, the things they thought nothing of saying out loud to any woman who passed by could not be repeated before children. They did not know for sure, but they suspected that the dances were beyond nasty, because the music was getting worse and worse with each passing season the Lord waited to make himself known. Songs that used to start in the head and fill the heart had dropped on down to places below the sash and the buckled belts, lower and lower, until the music was so low down you had to shut your windows and just suffer the summer sweat when the men in shirt sleeves propped themselves in window frames or clustered on rooftops, in alleyways, on stoops, and in the apartments of relatives playing the low-down stuff that signaled imminent demise. Or when a woman with a baby on her shoulder and a skillet in her hand sang, "Turn to my pillow where my sweet man used to be. How long, how long, how long?" Because you could hear it everywhere, even if you lived, as Alice Manfred and the Miller sisters did, on Clifton Place, with a leafy 60-foot tree every 100 feet, a quiet street with no fewer than 5 motor cars parked at the curb. You could still hear it, and there was no mistaking what it did to the children under their care, cocking their heads and swaying ridiculous, unformed hips. Ah, the sinners. Alice thought the low-down music, and in Illinois it was worse than here, had something to do with the silent black women and men marching down 5th Avenue to advertise their anger over 200 dead in East St. Louis, 2 of whom were her sister and brother-in-law killed in the riots. So many whites killed the papers would not print this number. Some said the rioters were disgruntled veterans who had fought in all colored units, were refused the services of the YMCA, over there and over here, and came home to white violence more intense than what they enlisted. And unlike the battles they fought in Europe, stateside fighting was pitiless and totally without honor. Others said they were whites terrified by the wave of southern Negroes flooding the towns, searching for work and places to live. A few thought about it and said how perfect was the control of workers, none of whom, like crabs in a barrel requiring no lid, no stick, not even a monitoring observation, would get out of the barrel. Alice, however, believed she knew the truth better than everybody. Her brother-in-law was not a veteran, and he had been living in East St. Louis since before the war. Nor did he need a white man's job. He owned a pool hall. As a matter of fact, he wasn't even in the riot. He had no weapons, confronted nobody on the street. He was pulled off a streetcar and stomped to death, and Alice's sister had just got the news and had gone back home to try and forget the color of his entrails when her house was torched and she burned crispy in its flame. Her only child, a little girl named Dorcas, sleeping across the road with her very best friend, did not hear the fire engine clanging and roaring down the street because when it was called, it didn't come. But she must have seen the flames, must have, because the whole street was screaming. She never said anything about it. She went to 2 funerals in 5 days and never said a word. Poor Dorcas. Alice thought, no, it wasn't the war and the disgruntled veterans. It wasn't the droves and droves of colored people flocking to paychecks and streets full of themselves. It was the music. The dirty, get-on-down music the women sang and the men played and both danced to, close and shameless or apart and wild. Alice was convinced, and so were the Miller sisters as they blew into cups of postum in the kitchen. It made you do unwise, disorderly things. Just hearing it was like violating the law. There had been none of that at the Fifth Avenue March. Just the drums and the colored Boy Scouts passing out explanatory leaflets to white men in straw hats who needed to know what the freezing faces already knew. Alice had picked up a leaflet that had floated to the pavement, read the words, and shifted her weight at the curb. She read the words and looked at Dorcas and read the words again. What she read seemed crazy, out of focus. Some great gap lunged between the print and the child. She glanced between them, struggling for the connection, something to close the distance between the silent, staring child and the slippery, crazy words. Then suddenly, like a rope cast for rescue, the drum spanned the distance, gathering them all up and connected them. Alice, Dorcas, her sister and her brother-in-law, the Boy Scouts and the frozen black faces, the watchers on the pavement, and those in the windows above. Alice carried that gathering rope with her always after that day on Fifth Avenue, and found it reliably secure and tight most of the time. Except when the men sat on windowsills fingering horns, and the women wondered how long. The rope broke then, disturbing her peace, making her aware of flesh, and something so free she could smell its blood smell, made her aware of its life below the sash and its red lip rouge. She knew from sermons and editorials that it wasn't real music, just colored folk stuff. Harmful, certainly. Embarrassing, of course, but not real, not serious. Yet Alice Manfred swore she heard a complicated anger in it, something hostile that disguised itself as flourish and roaring seduction. But the part she hated most was its appetite, its longing for the bash, the slit, a kind of careless hunger for a fight, or a red ruby stick pin for a tie. Either would do. It faked happiness, faked welcome, but it did not make her feel generous, this juke joint, barrel hooch, tonk house music. It made her hold her hand in the pocket of her apron to keep from smashing it through the glass pane, to snatch the world in her fist and squeeze the life out of it for doing what it did, and did to her, and everybody else she knew or knew about. Better to close the windows and the shutters, sweat in the summer heat of a silent Clifton Place apartment, than to risk a broken window or a yelping that might not know where or how to stop. I've seen her passing a cafe or an uncurtained window when some phrase or other, "Hit me but don't quit me," drifted out, and watched her reach with one hand for the safe gathering rope thrown to her 80 years ago on Fifth Avenue and ball the other one into a fist in her coat pocket. I don't know how she did it, balance herself with two different hand gestures, but she was not alone in trying, and she was not alone in losing. It was impossible to keep the Fifth Avenue drums separate from the belt buckle tunes vibrating from pianos and spinning on every Victrola. Impossible. Some nights are silent, not a motor car turning within earshot, no drunks or restless babies crying for their mothers, and Alice opens any window she wants to and hears nothing at all. Wondering at this totally silent night, she can go back to bed, but as soon as she turns the pillow to its smoother, cooler side, a melody line she doesn't remember where from sings itself, loud and unsolicited in her head. When I was young and in my prime, I could get my barbecue any old time. They're greedy, reckless words, loose and infuriating, but hard to dismiss because underneath, holding up the looseness like a palm, are the drums that put Fifth Avenue into focus. Her niece, of course, didn't have the problem. Alice had been re-raising her, correcting her since the summer of 1917. And although her earliest memory when she arrived from East St. Louis was the parade her aunt took her to, a kind of funeral parade for her mother and her father, Dorcas remembered it differently. While her aunt worried about how to keep the heart ignorant of the hips and the head in charge of both, Dorcas lay on a chenille bedspread, tickled and happy, knowing that there was no place to be where somewhere close by somebody was not licking his licorice stick, tickling the ivories, beating his skins, blowing off his horn while a knowing woman sang, "Ain't nobody gonna keep me down. You got the right key, baby, but the wrong keyhole. You got to get it, bring it, and put it right here, or else." Oh God, that passage is so good. I want to read it again. Her niece, of course, didn't have the problem. Alice had been re-raising her, correcting her since the summer of 1917, and although her earliest memory when she arrived from East St. Louis was the parade her aunt took her to, a kind of funeral parade for her mother and father, Dorcas remembered it differently. While her aunt worried about how to keep the heart ignorant of the hips and the head in charge of both, Dorcas lay on a chenille bedspread, tickled and happy, knowing that there was no place to be where somewhere, close by, somebody was not licking his licorice stick, tickling the ivories, beating his skins, blowing off his horn, while the knowing woman sang, "Ain't nobody gonna keep me down. You got the right key, baby, but the wrong keyhole. You got to get it, bring it, and put it right here, or else." Resisting her aunt's protection and restraining hands, Dorcas thought of that life below the sash as all the life there was. The drums she heard at the parade were only the first part, the first word of a command. For her, the drums were not an all-embracing rope of fellowship, discipline, and transcendence. She remembered them as a beginning, a start of something she looked to complete. Back in East St. Louis, as the little porch fell, wood chips, ignited and smoking, exploded in the air. One of them must have entered her stretched, dumb mouth and traveled down her throat, because it smoked and glowed there still. Dorcas never let it out, and never put it out. At first she thought if she spoke of it, it would leave her, or she would lose it through her mouth. And when her aunt took her on the train to the city, and crushed her hand while they watched a long parade, the bright wood chip sank further and further down, until it lodged comfortably somewhere below her navel. She watched the black, unblinking men, and the drums assured her that the glow would never leave her, that it would be waiting for and with her whenever she wanted to be touched by it, and whenever she wanted to let it loose to leap into fire again, whatever happened would be quick, like the dolls. They would have gone fast, wood after all, in a wooden cigar box, the red tissue paper skirt on Rochelle immediately, like a match, and then Bernadine's blue silk and Faye's white cotton cape. The fire would eat away at their legs, blacken them first with its hot breath, and their round eyes, with the tiny lashes and eyebrows she had painted in so very carefully, would have watched themselves disappear. Dorcas avoided thinking about the huge coffin just there in front, a few feet to her left, and about the medicinal odor of Aunt Alice sitting next to her, by concentrating on Rochelle and Bernadine and Faye, who would have no funeral at all. It made her bold. Even as a 9-year-old in elementary school, she was bold. However tight and tucked in her braids, however clunky her high-topped shoes that covered ankles other girls exposed in low-cut Oxfords, however black and thick her stockings, nothing hid the boldness swaying under her cast-iron skirt. Eyeglasses could not obscure it, nor could the pimples on her skin brought on by hard brown soap and a tilted diet. When she was little, and Alice Manfred agreed to sew for a month or two, Dorcas was watched over after school by the Miller sisters. Often there were 4 other children, sometimes one other. Their play was quiet and confined to a small area of the dining room. The 2-armed sister, Frances Miller, gave them apple butter sandwiches to eat. The 1-armed one, Neola, read them psalms. The strict discipline was occasionally lightened when Frances napped at the kitchen table. Then Neola might grow tired of the constraint the verses imposed on her own voice and select her child to light a match for her cigarette. She would take fewer than 3 puffs, and something in the gesture stirred something inside her, as she told her charges cautionary tales. Her stories, however, of the goodness of good behavior, collapsed before the thrill of the sin they deplored. The truth is that the message in her instructions failed because a week after he put the engagement ring on Neola's finger, the soon-to-be groom at her wedding left the state. The pain of his refusal was visual, for over her heart, curled like a shell, was the hand on which she had positioned the ring, as though she held the broken pieces of her heart together in the crook of a frozen arm. No other part of her was touched by this paralysis. Her right hand, the one that turned the tissue-thin pages of the Old Testament or held an old gold cigarette to her lips, was straight and steady. But the stories she told them of moral decay, of the wicked who preyed on the good, were made more poignant by this clutch of arm to breast. She told them how she had personally advised a friend to respect herself and leave the man who was no good to or for her. Finally, the friend agreed, but in 2 days, she went right back to him, God help us all, and Yola never spoke to her again. She told them how a very young girl, no more than 14, had left family and friends to traipse 400 miles after a boy who joined the army, only to be left behind and turn to a completely dissolute life in a camp town. So they could see, couldn't they, the power of sin in the company of a weak mind? The children scratched their knees and nodded, but Dorcas, at least, was enchanted by the frail, melty tendency of the flesh and the paradise that could make a woman go right back after 2 days, or make a girl travel 400 miles to a camp town, or fold Neola's arm, the better to hold the pieces of her heart in her hand. Paradise, all for paradise. By the time she was 17, her whole life was unbearable, and when I think about it, I know just how she felt. It is terrible when there's absolutely nothing to do or worth doing except to lie down and hope when you're naked she won't laugh at you, or that he, holding your breasts, won't wish they were some other way. Terrible, but worth the risk, because there's no other thing to do, although, being 17, you do it. Study, work, memorize, bite into food and the reputations of your friends, laugh at the things that are right side up and those that are upside down. It doesn't matter because you're not doing the thing worth doing, which is lying down somewhere in a dimly lit place enclosed in arms and supported by the core of the world. Think how it is if you can manage. Just manage it. Nature freaks for you then. Turns itself into shelter, byways. Pillows for 2. Spreads the limbs of lilac bushes low enough to hide you. And the city, in its own way, gets down for you. Cooperates. Smoothing its sidewalks, correcting its curbstones, offering you melons and green apples on the corner, racks of yellow headscarves, strings of Egyptian beads, Kansas fried chicken, and something with raisins call attention to an open window where the aroma seems to lurk. And if that's not enough, doors to speakeasies stand ajar, and in that cool, dark place, a clarinet coughs and clears its throat waiting for the woman to decide on the key. She makes up her mind, and as you pass by, informs your back that she is Daddy's little angel child. The city is smart at this, smelling and good and looking raunchy. Is that a typo? The city is smart at this, smelling and good and looking raunchy. Maybe it should be smelling good and looking raunchy. The city is smart at this, smelling good and looking raunchy, sending secret messages disguised as public signs. This way, open here, danger. To let colored only, single men on sale, women, wanted private room, stop dog on premises, absolutely no money, down fresh chicken free, delivery fast, and good at opening locks, dimming stairways, covering your moans with its own. There was a night in her 16th year when Dorcas stood in her body and offered it to either of the brothers for a dance. Both boys were shorter than she, but both were equally attractive. More to the point, they outstepped everybody so completely that when they needed tough competition, they were forced to dance with themselves. Sneaking out to the party with her best friend, Felice, ought to have been hard to arrange, but Alice Manford had overnight business in Springfield, and nothing could have been easier. The only difficulty was in finding something foxy enough to wear. The two girlfriends climbed the stairs, led straight to the right place more by the stride piano pouring over the door saddle than their recollection of the apartment number. They paused to exchange looks before knocking. Even in the dim hallway, the dark-skinned friend heightens the cream color of the other. Felice's oily hair enhances Dorcas's soft, dry waves. The door opens, and they step in. Before the lights are turned out, and before the sandwiches and the spiked soda water disappear, the one managing the record player chooses fast music suitable for the brightly lit room, where obstructing furniture has been shoved against walls, pushed into the hallway, and bedrooms piled high with coats. Under the ceiling light, pairs move like twins born with, if not for, the other, sharing a partner's pulse like a second jugular. They believe they know before the music does what their hands, their feet are to do, but that illusion is the music's secret drive. The control it tricks them into believing is theirs, the anticipation it anticipates. In between record changes, while the girls fan blouse next to air-damp collarbones or pat with anxious hands the damage moisture has done to their hair, the boys press folded handkerchiefs to their foreheads. Laughter covers indiscreet glances of welcome and promise, and takes the edge off gestures of betrayal and abandon. Dorcas and Felice are not strangers to the party. Nobody is. People neither of them has seen before join the fun as easily as those who have grown up in the building. Both girls have expectations made higher by the trouble they'd had planning outfits for the escapade. Dorcas, at 16, has yet to wear silk hose, and her shoes are those of someone much younger or very old. Felice has helped her loosen 2 braids behind her ears, and her fingertip is stained with the rouge she has streaked across her lips. With her collar turned under, her dress is more adult-looking, but the hard hand of a warning grown-up shows everywhere else. In the hem, the waist-centered belt, the short puffy sleeves. She and Felice have tried removing the belt altogether, then fixing it at her navel. Both strategies prove hateful. They know that a badly dressed body is nobody at all. And Felice had to chatter compliments all the way down 7th Avenue to get Dorcas to forget about her clothes and focus on the party. Music soars to the ceiling and through the windows, wide open for circulation as they enter. Immediately both girls are snatched by male hands and spun into the dancing center of the room. Dorcas recognizes her partner as Martin, who had been in her elocution class for a hot minute, which was as long as it took for the teacher to realize he would never relinquish ax for ask. Dorcas dances well, not as fast as some others, but she's graceful, in spite of those shaming shoes, and she's provocative. It is after 2 more dances that she notices the brothers commanding the attention of a crowd in the dining room. On the street, in vestibules as well as house parties, they are spectacular, moving like taut silk or loose metal. The stomach jump Dorcas and Felice have agreed is the sign of real interest and possible love surfaces and spreads as Dorcas watches the brothers. The sandwiches are gone now, the potato salad too, and everybody knows that the time for lights-out music is approaching. The unbelievable agility, the split-second timing the brothers are putting on display announces the culmination of the fast-dancing segment of the party. Dorcas moves into the hall that parallels the living and dining room. From its shadows to the archway, She has an unrestricted view of the brothers as they bring the performance to its rousing close. Laughing, they accept the praise that is due them. Adoring looks from girls, congratulating punches and slaps from the boys. They have wonderful faces, these brothers. Their smiles, more than flawless teeth, are amused and inviting. Someone fights with the Victrola, places the arm on, scratches the record, tries again, then exchanges the record for another. During the lull, the brothers notice Dorcas. Taller than most, she gazes at them over the head of her dark friend. The brothers' eyes seem wide and welcoming to her. She moves forward out of the shadow and slips through the group. The brothers turn up the wattage of their smiles. The right record is on the turntable now. She can hear its preparatory hiss as the needle slides towards its first groove. The brothers smile brilliantly. One leans a fraction of an inch toward the other, and never losing eye contact with Dorcas, whispers something. The other looks Dorcas up and down as she moves toward them. Then, just as the music, slow and smoky, loads up the air, his smile bright as ever, he wrinkles his nose and turns away. Dorcas has been acknowledged, appraised, and dismissed in the time it takes for a needle to find its opening groove. The stomach jump of possible love is nothing compared to the ice flows that block up her veins now. The body she inhabits is unworthy. Although it is young and all she has, it is as if it had decayed on the vine at budding time. No wonder Neola closed her arm and held the pieces of her heart in her hand. So by the time Joe Trace whispered to her through the crack of a closing door, her life had become almost unbearable. Almost. The flesh, heavily despised by the brothers, held secret the love appetite soaring inside it. I've seen swollen fish, serenely blind, floating in the sky. Without eyes, but somehow directed, these airships swim below cloud foam, and nobody can be turned away from the sight of them, because it's like watching a private dream. That was what her hunger was like. Mesmerizing, directed, floating, like a public secret just under the cloud cover. Alice Manfred had worked hard to privatize her niece, but she was no match for a city-seeping music that begged and challenged each and every day. Come, it said, come and do no wrong. Even the grandmothers sweeping the stairs closed their eyes and held their heads back as they celebrated their sweet desolation. Nobody does me like you do me. In the year that passed between the Dancing Brothers' dismissal and Alice Manfred's club meeting, the yoke Alice had knotted around Dorcas's neck frayed till it split. Other than the club women, very few knew where Joe Trace met her. Not at the candy counter of Dougie's where he first saw her and wondered if that, the peppermint she bought, was what insulted her skin, light and creamy everywhere but her cheeks. Joe met Dorcas in Alice Manfred's house right up under her nose and right before her very eyes. He had gone there to deliver an order to Malvone Edwards' cousin Sheila, who said if Joe came to 237 Clifton Place before noon, he could deliver her order, the number 2 nut brown and the vanishing cream, right there, and she wouldn't have to wait till the following Saturday, or walk all the way over to Lennox at the night to pick it up, unless of course he wanted to come on her job. Joe had decided he would wait till next Saturday, because not collecting the $1.35 wasn't going to strap him. But after he left Miss Ransom's house and stood for a half hour watching Bud and CT abusing each other at checkers, he decided to check Sheila out right fast and quit for the day. His stomach was a bit sour, and his feet already hurt. He didn't want to be caught delivering or writing orders in the rain either, rain that had been threatening all during that warm October morning. And even though getting home early meant the extended company of a speechless Violet while he fussed with the sink trap or the pulley that turned the clothesline on their side of the building, the Saturday meal would be early, too, and satisfying. Late summer greens cooked with that ham bone left over from last Sunday. Joe looked toward the lean, scrappy end-of-week meals, but hated the Sunday one. A baked ham, a sweet, heavy pie to follow it. Violet's determination to grow an ass she swore she once owned was killing him. Once upon a time, he bragged about her cooking. Couldn't wait to get back to the house and devour it. But he was 50 now, and appetites change, we know. He still liked candy, hard candy, not divinity or caramel, sour balls being his favorite. If Violet would confine herself to soup and boiled vegetables, with a bit of bread to go along, he would be perfectly satisfied. That's what he was thinking about when he found 237 and climbed the stairs. The argument between CT and Bud over the fate of SS Ethiopia had been too good, too funny. He had listened to them longer than he thought, because it was way past noon when he got there. Woman noise could be heard through the door. Joe rang anyway. The peppermint girl with the bad skin answered the door, and while he was telling her who he was and what he'd come for, Sheila poked her head into the vestibule and shouted, "CPT, surprised me for once, Joe Trace." He smiled and stepped in the door, stood there smiling, and did not put his sample case down until the hostess, Alice Manfred, came and told him to come in the parlor. They were thrilled to have him interrupt their social. It was a luncheon meeting of the Civic Daughters to plan for the Thanksgiving fundraiser for the National Negro Business League. They had settled what they could, tabled what they had to, and begun the chicken a la king lunch over which Alice had taken the greatest pains. Pleased, happy even, with their work and with each other's company, they did not know they were missing anything until Alice sent Dorcas to answer the ring, and Sheila, remembering what she had said to Joe, jumped up when she heard a male voice. They made him feel like the singing men in spats. The young ones who clustered in the corners wearing ties the color of handkerchiefs sticking out of their breast pockets. The young roosters who stood without waiting for the chicks who were waiting for them. Under the women's flirty, appraising eyes, Joe felt the pleasure of his own smile, as though sand-colored spats covered his shoe tops. They laughed, tapped the tablecloth with their fingertips, and began to tease, berate, and adore him all at once. They told him how tall men like him made them feel, complained about his lateness and insolence, asked him what else he had in his case besides whatever it was that made Sheila so excited. They wondered why he never rang their doorbells or climbed 4 flights of double-flight stairs to deliver anything to them. They sang their compliments, their abuse, and only Alice confined herself to a thin smile, a closed look, and did not join the comments with one of her own. Of course he stayed to lunch. Of course. Although he tried not to eat anything much and spoil his appetite for the late summer greens he was sure were simmering in the pot for him. But the women touched his hair and looked right at him, musing over his 2-color eyes, and ordered him, "Come on over here, man, and sit yourself down. Fix you a plate? Let me fix you a plate." He protested. They insisted. He opened his case. They offered to buy him out. "Eat, baby, eat," they said. "You're not going out in that pneumonia weather without something sticking to your bones. Don't make no sense with all we got here. Dorcas, girl, bring this man an empty plate so I can fill it for him here." "Hush, Sheila." There are women his age mostly, with husbands, children, grandchildren too. Hard workers for themselves and anyone who needed them. And they thought men were ridiculous and delicious and terrible, taking every opportunity to let them know what they were. In a group such as this one, they could do with impunity what they were cautious about alone with any man, stranger or friend, who rang the doorbell with a sample case in his hand, no matter how tall he was, how country his smile, or however much sadness was in his eyes. Besides, they liked his voice. It had a pitch, a note they heard only when they visited stubborn old folks who would not budge from their front yards and overworked fields to come to the city. It reminded them of men who wore hats to plow and to eat supper in, who blew into saucers of coffee and held knives in their fists when they ate. So they looked right at him and told him any way they could how ridiculous he was, and how delicious and how terrible, as if he didn't know. Joe Trace counted on flirty, laughing women to buy his wares, and he knew better than to take up with any of them. Not if he wanted to be able to lean over a pool table for a shot, exposing his back to his customers' husbands. But that day in Alice Manfred's house, as he listened to and returned their banter, something in the wordplay took on weight. I've wondered about it, what he thought then and later, and about what he said to her. He whispered something to Dorcas when she let him out the door, and nobody looked more pleased and surprised than he did. If I remember right, that October lunch in Alice Manfred's house, something was off. Alice was vague, and anybody in her company for 30 minutes knew that wasn't her style. She was the one who, with a look, could cut good gossip down to a titter when it got out of hand. And maybe it was her head of a seamstress head that made what you thought was a cheerful dress turn loud and tatty next to hers. But she could lay a table. Food might be a tad skimpy in the portions, and I believe she had a prejudice against butter. She used so little of it in her cakes, but the biscuits were light, and the plates, the flatware, sparkling, and arranged just so. Open her napkins wide as you please, and not a cat face anywhere. She was polite at the lunch, of course, not too haughty either, but not paying close attention to things. Distracted she was, about Dorcas probably. I always believed that girl was a pack of lies. I could tell by her walk her underclothes were beyond her years, even if her dress wasn't. Maybe back in October, Alice was beginning to think so too. By the time January came, nobody had to speculate. Everybody knew. I wonder if she had a premonition of Joe Trace knocking on her door. Or it could have been something she read in all those newspapers stacked neatly along the baseboard in her bedroom. Everybody needs a pile of newspapers to peel potatoes on, serve bathroom needs, wrap garbage, but not like Alice Manfred. She must have read them over and over else. Why would she keep them? And if she read anything in the newspaper twice, she knew too little about too much. If you have secrets you want kept or want to figure out those other people have, a newspaper can turn your mind. The best thing to find out what's going on is to watch how people maneuver themselves in the streets. What sidewalk preachers stop in their tracks? Do they walk right through the boys kicking cans along the sidewalk or holler at them to quit? Ignore the men sitting on car fenders or stop to exchange a word? If a fight breaks out between a man and a woman, do they cross in the middle of the block to watch or run to the corner in case it gets messy? One thing for sure, the streets will confuse you, teach you, or break your head. But Alice Manfred wasn't the kind to give herself reasons to be in the streets. She got through them quick as she could to get back to her house. If she had come out more often, sat on the stoop or gossiped in front of the beauty shop, she would have known more than what the paper said. She might have known what was happening under her nose. When she did find out what took place between that October day and that awful January one that ended everything, the last people on earth she wanted to see was Joe Trace or anybody connected to him. It happened, though. The woman who avoided the streets led into her living room the woman who sat down in the middle of one. That's Violet. Oh my gosh. Wow, this is a really juicy part. Now, that's actually not the end of this part. It's just like a little break in the paragraphs. But I think it's a really nice place to end it. Yeah, super juicy part because we got a lot of background on Dorcas and Alice. Oh my gosh. It's all like, we're all coming together. It's like break down one character, break down one character, break down one character, and then we're all going to see how they kind of come to a boiling point, right? Oh my gosh, it's so good. And Toni Morrison is she's like a wordsmith. She really is a wizard with just like the actual syntax of her words, of her sentences. It's so interesting, and it can trip you up sometimes because like there were some sentences in there that were like they didn't have any structure. They were just words, but they're still so evocative. Oh, she's so good. I'm actually like, the deeper I go, this might be obvious, but the deeper I go into this book, like the more I'm enjoying it. It's because I read Paradise before this, and Paradise is super, super dense, but it's structured in a very similar way to this one. So, like, I loved it. It seems like there's fewer pieces in this story, so it's happening a little faster. Because in Paradise, there's so many like different characters and storylines. So I'm loving the pace. It's like dancing around the subject until, we're like slowly picking it apart. Oh, so good. And I hope that you're enjoying it too. I'm enjoying reading it to you for sure. So that was part 3. I'll try to get this out as soon as possible. And then record part 4 as soon as possible because I am loving this book. And it's overdue at the library, so I gotta get through these a little bit faster. Yeah, thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you are well and truly relaxed, if not dead asleep by now. And yeah, that's it for me. That was Jazz part 3. I hope to see you very, very soon. Goodbye.